I brought you all here because I got an idea about a guy exploring a forest and he digs up this crystal that he later finds out that is cursed. Now, he has to find a way to stop it from causing mayhem. So I'm assembling a crew. You in?
Hell yeah. Let's do this, yeah.
Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alright, yeah. Let's do it.
Alright, cool. Let's get started. Welcome back to Digital Refill. In today's episode, we are going to be going over how I created my latest short film, Cursed Crystal. Link to the original video will be in the description below. The idea behind the short film started when I stumbled upon a piece of new software called Embergen. Embergen is a volumetric fluid simulation tool that lets you create things like fire and smoke, but in real time. I started to brainstorm ideas for videos that involved using Embergen. At first, I thought I would make a small video or skit that wouldn't take too much time to create, but I got ambitious, and I ended up writing a longer story. I started with a rough outline that I later turned into a script. I made revisions to the script, and once I had my final version of the script done, I started going through what I was going to need to complete this project. This is where I realized this project was going to be bigger and take a lot longer to create than my previous projects. I had 2 locations, a prop that I needed to create from scratch on top of various other props that I needed, a visual effects shot that included a vortex storm cloud that was going to need a smoke simulation, I needed a voiceover that wasn't my own for the news bit, and I was doing this all on my own. With the script finalized, it was time to make the actual crystal. I drew a couple designs for the crystal, and after picking one, I made a clay model out of it. I baked it in the oven so it could harden. I researched as much as I could about resin casting and molds. I ended up using silicone, a small bucket, water, and some dish soap. By mixing the silicone, water, and dish soap together, I was able to clump up the silicone until it built up into a ball that was still soft. I took the clump of silicone from the bucket and then pushed my clay model of the crystal into it. After some time has passed, the soft silicone mold hardens. The final product is a mold that can be used with resin that I can now make the crystal out of. I mixed a solution of resin and purple alcohol ink into the mold. As the resin was curing, I added droplets of black alcohol ink and used a toothpick to shape the clouded look that was in the middle. Once that cured completely, I had my crystal ready. When it came to filming, I used my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. During the shoot in the forest, I used an ND filter so I can open up my aperture to get some nice bokeh. I used only natural lighting in all the shots in the forest. Being a one-man film crew, it took a while to get the exact shots I needed. In every shot, I had to place the camera, frame it, do a test shot, watch the recording, and adjust as needed. For indoor shots, like the one where I walked through the kitchen and the hallway, I used 2 LED panels off to the frame right to mimic sunlight coming through the window. For the shots in the living room, I used the Godox SL60 with a softbox on it to also mimic the soft lighting that would be coming into the living room during the day. Now we'll take a look at how I did the visual effects. We'll start with the shots that have the crystal glowing. In After Effects, I started with the advanced lightning effect with the fast box blur applied. On the layer above, I created a solid with turbulent noise and keyframe the evolution setting. I also added a fast box blur on top of this layer. The first layer then has its track matte set to Luma matte with our turbulent noise layer being the matte. I repeated this process until I got a shape close to what the crystal was. These layers were pre-composed and put into the comp with the footage. I had to track the glowing effect on top of the crystal, and I used Kingpin Tracker from Red Giant to do this. I also created a matte on top of the crystal to shave off the bits of the glowing layer that are overextending. I added some effects like camera lens blur, glow, and the exposure effect to help match the effect to the shot. For some shots, like this one where the Kingpin Tracker was not working for me, I manually had to track the shot using a null and parenting all the layers to that null. This was repeated for all the other shots where the crystal was glowing. For the particles coming out of the ground in the forest, I used a particle system within Blender. Using vortex, magnetic, and turbulence force fields, I was able to get particles to emit and hover in the air. For the shot where I walk up to the particles and they dive back into the ground, I created a particle system in Blender that emits from a plane and shoot out and hover. I rendered that out, and in After Effects, I reversed the render, making the particles shoot back into the ground. I added also a heat wave effect where the particles are and added a slight glimmer of light when the particles dive back into the ground. I also rotoscoped out the leaf to make the particles look like they're going behind it. For the shot where I'm hitting the crystal with a meat tenderizer, I used Trapcoat Particular in After Effects. After messing around with the settings to get the look I want, I keyframed the particles per second on every hit. I then made a matte for the particles so they appear to be coming from the top of the table. For the ending shot, I also used Trapcoat Particular to have the particles slowly coming up into the frame. Next up, we have the visual effects for the news station bit. This was a project on its own. I first created a breaking news 3D motion graphic inside Blender and rendered it out using the EV renderer. Next, I wanted to create a video for the news station bit that looked like it was footage that was obtained from someone holding their phone recording the vortex storm clouds that was appearing in the sky. I started with finding an image online of some buildings. I then projected that image onto some geometry. I also projected another image of a sky on a plane behind the buildings. I then animated the camera to make it seem like it was handheld. I rendered out one pass with just the buildings and the background being transparent, and one of just the sky. In After Effects, I took all my layers and comped them all together to create the final video. I took that and created all the news motion graphics on top of it. Putting it all together, I overlaid the finished pieces onto the TV, rotoscoped myself out where I have to go in front of the TV, and added various effects on top of the CG elements to make it blend into the TV better. Now let's go over how I created the vortex storm clouds. Thanks to Embergen, this process was extremely faster than other methods. Inside Embergen, I had two primitives, each hooked up to a blend node with a noise node attached that gave me this result. I turned off show emitters for both primitives. I had two forces hooked up to the simulation node. One was a point force and the other a line force. With that in place and increasing the smoke rate under each emitter, we get this. Now at the time of me recording this tutorial, there wasn't a way to import a camera from other software, so I had to figure out a way to match the perspective of the simulation with the footage I had. At first I was going to eyeball it to match, and instead I downloaded a program called WindowTop. Once installed, I opened up the footage that I need to match the vortex storm perspective to. On the footage window, I enabled opacity and maximized it over Embergen. I then enabled click-through. Now in Embergen, I could go to the camera node and select Use Camera. This will force Embergen to switch over to the camera. Now it was a matter of playing around with the window and moving the camera around until the perspective matched. Once that was complete, it was time to export the sequence. I started the export at frame 500 since this is where the simulation of the smoke looked the way I wanted, and then I exported the next 500 frames after that. I also made sure to output a large resolution. In After Effects, I combined all my layers. I masked out the door frame, brought back the trees at the bottom, and added the lightning, which was made up of advanced lightning, exposure, and fast box blur effects, and setting the matte to the vortex layer to make it look like lightning is within the clouds. The process was the same with the news station bit, adding the vortex storm cloud in between the building and the sky render layers. Finally, with all the visual effects done, it was time to do the sound design. For this project, I used a lot of sound effects from Epidemic Sounds. They had a large collection of sound effects that I needed to cut down on the amount of Foley that I needed to do. For sound effects like thunder, I reused the same audio multiple times. In order for them to not sound exactly the same, I made sure to stretch and speed up the audio so each thunder sound effect sounded different. For the moment when the TV was turned on, I used audio from a movie that was in the public domain. Just like with other sound effects, I made sure to give it some treatment to blend with the scene. In this case, I used parametric equalizer and some reverb. Here it is before.
Well,
the bacilli are multiplying.
that kicks the bone marrow theory in the head.
And here it is after.
Well,
The bacilli are multiplying.
that kicks the bone marrow theory in the head.
For the news station bit, I had a friend of mine read out a script I created for the news broadcast. I made sure to fill the room we were recording in with some cloth material to stop sounds from bouncing off the hard surfaces in the room. This helped with reducing the amount of reflected sound being picked up by the microphone. After all that, it was time to add music that I used from Filmstro, then adjusting levels and tweaking things until I finally decided to call it finished. That sums up the process I took to create this project. If you are deciding to film something by yourself, one key tip I can give is to keep yourself organized every step of the way through. Everything from writing down props you'll need, creating a shot list, a visual effects shot list, and even creating a good file structure to keep track of all your files will play a big part in making sure things go smoothly. Take as much time as you can organizing yourself from pre-production to post-production. That wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching this behind the scenes of how I created my short film Cursed Crystal, and I will see you next time.